begins by saying, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment." What's James saying to him? Cindy? I know there are some who simply want a position for whatever the reason might be, maybe numerous reasons. But then on the other hand, I tend to look at this more like you would an elder, for example. He needs to desire to teach. Anybody who's going to teach the gospel and who really wants to stand before an audience, in other words, or work with someone even, he needs to realize there are some limitations here as to how he goes about this. It's not a matter of taking a turn, and I think sometimes people are pressed into it without really wanting to, and that's, if they don't want to, then they're good. But at the same time, they are going to be judged more strictly, just like an elder is held to a higher standard, or we consider individuals who are deacons, for example, but they're not in the same category as the teacher that the elder is supposed to be. Doesn't say anything about that to the deacons as it does in regard to the elders. So teaching may not be a thing that they do, but there are a lot of other things they can do, and certainly need to engage in it. But as he explains, this sentence begins with the word for, that is verse 2. And James is explaining, and he said the reason teachers are going to be judged with stricter judgment is because we all stumble in many ways. What does he mean, stumble? Is this the area of sin we're talking about? Like stumbling block? We all certainly are not free from that. We all make those mistakes. We all sin. But the one area where we can really see, and he's zeroing in on here, is in what we say. And if that's not something we take pretty seriously, the implication's really, I think, pretty open here. It's fairly clear. The teachers talk more. That's what they do. And so, as a result of that, they're going to come under stricter judgment, but that's because they have said a lot more words. And of course, the passage shows us this has to take into account and recognize our responsibilities and our opportunities. Now, you remember Jesus said, to whom much is given, much is required. It's a shame for an individual with this ability to not use it. On the other hand, the teacher will be judged for his teaching. But a parent's going to be judged for his parenting too, and part of that's teaching. By word and by example, if at all possible. And of course, we already talked about the shepherd's going to be judged for his too, but the different hats that people wear come with certain responsibilities and accountabilities to God, and the teacher fits in that category. There is not a separation in a person's faith and the role that he is in. So, I think verse 2 is telling us a little bit about James's attitude in regard to the tongue. Anybody who doesn't stumble in what he says, he's a perfect man, able to bridle his own body. That's an interesting thought, isn't it? The person who can control his tongue is a complete, mature Christian. We're working in James chapter 3. So, his point here is that controlling the tongue is difficult. It's not something that's just a really easy thing to do that he can control. And the person that can do that is clearly a person who has developed spiritual control over that. James is showing us that one of the principles here of the marks of maturity of a Christian is that matter of self-discipline. Temperance, self-discipline. Self-discipline in regards to one's speech, however, is pretty rare. But he's showing us a very important principle here. And he, I think, is observing how rarely face to face, but they'll hide behind that computer or phone or whatever they're using, and they're liable to call you anything or accuse you of anything, just to make life miserable for you. They have no interest in whether it's the truth or not. And yet this is the same thing. And the funny thing is, a lot of kids won't talk to each other, but they'll sit and text each other. That's how important it is in their communication. But they haven't learned any social skills. They haven't learned to talk to anybody. And I don't know why that is. Maybe because they've never had to. Maybe it's because nobody ever worked with them to teach, but for whatever the reason is. But then you turn around on the other side and hear people that, with a lot of communication skill on that system, and you don't care what they say about you. It's because they can do it and they think they'll never get caught. They'll never have to give an account. They're not accountable for what they're doing. So that's one of the difficulties that I see in all of this. James explains why the tongue has to be controlled. He points out it's a very important, it may be little, but it's a very important part of the body. This is the way we communicate. And he uses 3 different illustrations here to express what the tongue is like and why it needs to be controlled. And the first thing is, he talks about the bit in the horse's mouth. In verse 3, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. We look at ships, although they're so large and driven by fierce winds, they're turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. So this first comparison here, horses obey their riders because they have this bit in their mouth, and the riders pull on the reins so that it moves the horse. And in so doing, they're able to control the entire body. So this is a very important observation that James is making here. The bit controls the whole body of the horse, even though the horse is so much larger. The tongue is that small member of the body, and yet at the same time, it can do very great things. Secondly, he talks about the rudder of a ship. Large ships are driven by strong waves and winds. If that rudder wasn't there, it would be very difficult to get a large ship where they wanted it to go. So, this first observation is similar to that first illustration. The bit controls the whole body of the horse, the rudder controls the whole of the ship. So, this observation implies that the first is implying what the first is telling us here. So, the rider has control over the horse, the rudder has control over the ship, but does the person have control over his tongue? And of course, this begins in the mind with the thoughts. So we're talking about self-control again. Being able to utilize our minds the way that they should be utilized. And even so, he says in verse 5, the tongue is a little member and it boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. I know we're all familiar with forest fires. I've been fortunate to have never been caught in one, but I've seen and been close to a few. And it's not a pretty sight. And of course, we experience all of that fire in North Texas, and every year it's California and the West, or portions of the West, burned off for whatever reason. All it takes is a little spark to get things started. If the conditions are right, it can be anything from a cigarette butt flipped out of a car, or a spark from or heat off a catalytic converter, or any number of different things. Somebody not putting out a campfire correctly, or just anything. So, this fire illustration, I think, adds another dimension to James's teaching here. It's a devastating and a destructive thing. And that's his emphasis in this thing about the fire. A small fire, a spark. This can set a huge forest ablaze and just burn for hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres. And it becomes very difficult to put out. But this dimension here, I think in particular, is important. Yes, sir.
Just a general observation, I'm wondering if you would agree. It seems to me, at least in our culture here in North Texas, that we start off as kids, we have pretty good control of our tongue, we're taught to be seen and not heard. Then we get to be teenagers, college, and we completely lose that, and we sin with our tongue all the time. Then we get older and we realize, boy, that really gets me in trouble, and we kind of control the tongue again, so we're cycling. But I volunteer with hospice, and they send me to nursing homes where the senior people have no control over their tongue at all. So it just seems like, as a culture, we just vacillate on this control of the tongue. Would you agree with that generality?
I think that's a very astute observation.
So, not as, for me, now y'all are all young, but for me, as I'm getting old, that makes me think, man, I'm gonna have to watch this battle all over again about this tongue and keep that under control. So I've heard, and it tends to be in our culture that women outlive the men, so this tends to be grandmas that say, oh, I can say what I want and get away with it. Well, that's cute to a point, unless we're crossing that line and losing control of the tongue. So I can't cross that line and lose control of my tongue and have an excuse, is the main point I'm trying to make.
That's definitely so, yes, sir.
And while I think it does sort of include maybe foul language and stuff, I think this is also talking about just maybe the way we say things, the harshness or the anger. And I guess I look at congregations who divide over personalities or, something somebody teaches, and we cannot seem to find a way to work through as a congregation or something of misunderstandings or something. And I think it agrees with, when he was saying, yes, we all have problems controlling it, but I think we're also talking about, because as teachers, we could really harm the congregation. The whole church is really influenced by the way that the teacher teaches.
In thinking about that, a lot of cases as people get older, they can't help themselves simply because their mind has been affected. And as a result of that, they don't know what they're saying.
Sure.
Put a person under anesthetic. Don't know what they're saying either. Things like that are forgivable. We can understand that. But, the wise man said, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver. It's quite a thing to say the right thing at the right time. Sometimes we just don't need to say anything. Sometimes we just need to be there to listen because somebody wants to be. They want to get things off their chest. They want to get it out in the open. Yes, Jerry.
It's interesting, in chapter 2, we talked about slow to speak and quick to hear.
Right.
Well, I'm sure we've all heard the adage that God gave us 2 ears, 1 mouth. That means we need to speak less, listen more. I mean, that's not the reason why he gave us 2 ears, but it is a good application of said anatomy. It emphasizes the importance that we need to listen. And in my work, I have dealt with many speech classes and many classes on communication, and it's always talking about active listening. And that entails understanding what is being said.
same time, all of this is new. And sometimes what we say really hurts. The fact that the Jews didn't have anything to do with the Samaritans. For example, you can imagine the tension. And John 4 is a good example when Jesus goes and is willing to work with the woman at the well, and she can't understand why he, being a Jew, would pay any attention at all to her as a Samaritan. So this gives you the idea that a lot of this animosity came up between Jews and Gentiles, and it's all that. It's that way everywhere. There are things that come between countries that the people are taught one thing, and this country somebody teaches something else, and before you know it, they're at war. So words spoken can have a devastating effect, or they can have a very encouraging, uplifting kind of effect on individuals. One of the things Jesus said is that this is something that requires a heart change. These people have become Christians. They need to realize just how important it is to utilize their words in the way that God would have them to do. In Matthew 12, verse 33, Jesus said, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good things. The evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil things. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give an account for every careless word they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So we can't think we can just simply change our words and that's going to be the end of the story. It has to come from within. We have to learn to control our thoughts, our minds about these things. This is where it comes from. So a change of heart is what brings about the control of the tongue. And by doing that, we exercise greater mastery over all the other parts of our body. If we can do that, James said, we can become the perfect man. That is what? The mature, developed, well-developed Christian. One who's grown up in Christ, in other words. So, in verse 6, he said, the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. And it sets on fire the course of nature. It is set on fire by hell. Every kind of beast and bird and reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It's an unruly evil full of deadly poison. As we said, it's always there. And it has the potential to get loose. If we're not thinking before we're speaking, we'll say something sooner or later, even though we're trying our hardest, and it will wreak havoc among those that are here. Careless words, we know, destroy relationships, destroy people's lives, hurt feelings. Yes.
And it can be, you can be saying the right thing and saying it in the wrong tone, and do just as much damage.
We hurt ourselves too, don't we? We hurt our own lives by the use of, improper use of our tongue. So, as you mentioned, let's go back to this: quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Yes.
And that's one of the problems of social media is you can't get the intonation that you do in person. And of course, that can be good or bad, because if you're in person and you're using the wrong tone of voice, that's not good. But, you know, but when you're typing something, emojis help. You know, sometimes people will take what you're saying the wrong way, take what you're typing the wrong way. And so we kind of have to be careful of the meaning we convey.
be difficult either way you go. You say something you intended to the good, and some person, he didn't wanna hear it the first place, or in the first place, and so he just goes off. And another person may not understand, and if he's the kind of person he needs to be, he'll call you up and ask you what you meant, if nothing else, or at least text you back and ask you. But this is this verse 6 is kind of a complicated sentence, and one translation, the NET, does a really good job with it. It says the tongue is a fire. The tongue represents the world of wrongdoing among the parts of our body. It pollutes the entire body, and it sets fire to the course of human existence, and it's set on fire by hell. So that's one way of looking at this. The tongue can control the whole body, but it also controls and wreaks havoc throughout our lives as well as those that it touches. So, as I said, we destroy relationships, we destroy lives, we hurt feelings, we ruin the way that other people see us, and we get ourselves into all kinds of trouble simply because we're not being slow to speak. Used to have that old, coin that old term, fly off the handle. I don't know if anybody's chopped much wood, but I know what happens when an axe flies off the handle. It's a killer if somebody's standing in front of you. But at the same time, that's to be adapted to this. This is destructive. It'll totally destroy an individual. James is saying the tongue can pollute the entire body. Our tongues are corrupting influence sometimes, and the words that we say corrupt our hearts. It corrupts the hearts of others. Parents using the wrong kind of language can destroy the lives of kids. Whether it's bad language or is it just the way they treat the child. A lot of times it's just abuse and can literally destroy a child. What we say can corrupt the hearts and lives of others. So that's been James' point. In this way, the tongue controls the body. It represents a world of wrongdoing among the other parts of our body. It may be small, but it can pollute the entire body and set on fire its course. So when our tongues are foul and filthy, they're not godly and pure, our bodies begin to follow along, because the problem is behind the tongue. It's what's happened to our mind. That's what's really been polluted here. And as Jesus said, that which comes out of the mouth first is in the heart or the mind of the individual. When we gossip and speak malicious words, we become dark people, ugly people with a dark heart. When we slander people, we're exposing the cold heart that we have towards those. And our words darken our hearts and stain our souls. So we have to be careful, don't we? And our words change people. I mean, whether it's parents and kids or whoever it is, our tongues set fire to the course of human existence. And the cycle just keeps going and going from generation to generation. So our careless words and hurtful words, they harm people and they set the lives of others to destruction. But James is sharing a little bit of irony here in verses 7 and 8. He says humans have been able to tame all kinds of wild animals, birds, whatever. Whether it's beast, bird, reptile, creature of the sea, all of this has been tamed. But at the same time, what's happened? We still can't what he says about it. Let us make man in our image. Now then, Jesus comes along and he wants us to be protectors of the divine image. Our hearts and our lives need to be patterned after Christ instead of after so much of what we hear in the world. With our tongues, we bless the Lord, and then we curse people who were made in the very image and likeness of God. What did Jesus say? He said, bless those who what? Curse you. That's not what so many people get out of this, is it? They haven't paid attention to what Jesus said. Here James is saying, out of the same mouth flows both blessings and cursings. So how's this possible? Why do we do this? And yet this is most certainly what happens. One moment we can be saying beautiful, uplifting, encouraging words, and then the next thing we know, we're saying things that just devastate somebody's soul. So, James is very plain. He said, none written, these things ought not to be against me.
There's so many reasons why I am angry at Satan, hate Satan, fill in that blank however you want to. One of the big reasons is he doesn't have to do any new tricks. Every generation of humans, we get the same thing and we fall into the same trap, trying to do sins of the mouth. You don't agree with me, so you're dumb and I hate you, and the next generation doesn't learn from the previous, and we do the same thing.
And God says it's just plain wrong. It's in. There's no mistake.
If I don't see you as someone that's made in the similitude of God, that's on me. And I haven't learned a thing. I'm still an immature child.
No, actually, the first sin was a result of a conversation between Satan and Eve. So that started way early on.
And a lot of words after that cause other things too. This has a connection back to that double-minded person we talked about in chapter 1 and verse 8. James' word restless here is the same word he uses in chapter 1 and verse 8 when he says the doubter is double-minded, unstable in all of his ways. The word restless is saying exactly the same thing. It's just translated with a different word. When we can't control our speech, we're unstable, we're restless. We're like the double-minded person being tossed around by the waves. We're wishy-washy. We're not solid. We're not anchored to anything. We need to be anchored to Christ. We need to have our hearts cleansed, and we need to be made over in His image, but we just can't seem to get control of our tongues. Instead, we'd rather, as we say, give people a piece of our mind. Well, that kind of mind, we don't want a piece of it. This mind needs to be changed. We can't be God-focused and have a critical, filthy, or impure mind, which results in the tongue that follows. And I know people go to worship this way. On the one hand, they're praising God, and on the other hand, they're cursing their fellow man. I don't mean using bad language. I mean in the sense of wishing evil upon them. But our mouths are praising God, and yet at the same time, we don't feel any, or seem to feel any pains of conscience, because we haven't educated ourselves to what we need to be saying. Or if we have, we just plain callous that conscience over. Yes, Gerald.
We need to take the example of Christ on that. He, of all people, could have been the one that could have called down death and destruction upon those that harmed him. And he could have just wished evil upon, and he could have brought the evil upon many people. Yet what did he do? He said, Father, forgive them. We need to see them as souls in need of saving. We need to see them as it says in similitude, as Gilbert mentioned, in the similitude of God. We need to see them not as the evil that has enwrapped them, but as ones that are God created and in need of His saving grace. Again, that goes back to being mature. We need to follow the example of Christ, not of the world.
It's interesting. We curse men who've been made in the likeness of the image of God, in the likeness of God. And then he closes with saying, "Does the fountain send out from the same opening both fresh water or bitter? Can a fig tree, brethren, produce olives, or a vine produce figs? Salt water can't produce fresh water either." So, these things, you talk about putting a climax to his statements here. They drive a stake into the heart of the individual who is not paying attention. We know very well that a disciple of Christ can't be like that. He can't be switching between two worlds. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. Christians, those who follow Christ, don't speak blessings and cursing, no more than a grapevine can bring forth figs or whatever it is.
Okay, I'm ready to ask you the hard questions. I'm here to learn, so tell me from your experience or anyone else, give me a tool I can use to help me better control my tongue. What works for you? The best I have right now is I've been blessed with a couple of people in my life who are just exceptional at control of the tongue. So if I can catch myself, I'll think, what would that person say? Can I act like that person? And that works most of the time, but I would like an even better tool. So what works for you, for y'all? How do you get better control of your tongue?
Well, I think you hinted at it. What would Jesus say? Is what we need to think here. You remember in Ephesians 4:29, he said, let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up and fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Ephesians 4:29. If we can keep that in mind, it will help us tremendously. What helps you, Cindy?
I don't know if I'm very good at it, but my brother tells a story when he was teaching a Bible class, and they were talking, I think, about this topic, or, like controlling your tongue. And a man raised his hand and said, "Oh, I used to work where this gentleman would say nothing, and the arguments would fly all around him. And then at the end, everybody would turn to him and ask his opinion. And then he would give his opinion and state what he saw and heard, and everybody respected him because he controlled his tongue, and he basically stayed quiet. Now, the real interesting part for me is my brother went, "Who was that?" And the gentleman said who it was, and it was Mom's brother. And this happened just about 10 years ago. Now but it was, yeah, he had already passed away. But he was known for not saying anything until everybody had put out their opinions. But everybody respected him for his opinion because he listened. I would just suggest not saying anything until you really know what you want to say.
to be much more common in our society that if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. And even those of us who grew up hearing that,
Well, this is social media and it's keyboard still at the time, but I've just gotten so fed up with all the political arguing and everything. I put
Well,
on
this
my
is the time
Facebook
of year
page,
for that, isn't it?
I put on my Facebook page that, I stated that I was tired of it, all that, and from now on, if I think a reply is warranted to something, I'm just gonna put scriptures. I'm not gonna express an opinion of my own, I'm just gonna quote an applicable scripture or two.
Well, we may think it's impossible here, but God's saying, yes, you can. It doesn't do us any good to say, I can't do that. That just leaves us hanging out there.
Good point.
Excuse me. But, like I said, God is telling us we can change, and we can do it with His help. And that's why we look at passages like Ephesians 4:29. Another version of it says, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. That's the NLT. So, we need to learn from James. He wants us, as Paul said to the Ephesians in verse 23 of chapter 4, to be renewed in the spirit of our minds. And to put on that new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. That's our lesson for this evening. I thank you all for being here and for your comments. I appreciate it very much. You got a song, Gerald?
I do. Good for the invitation.
Prepared to have a second song. So invitation will be number 344, number 344. If it's not obvious, everybody turn to number 394. 394. Angry, love one another. 394. Let's just sing the chorus after the third verse. So let's just sing all three verses and then the chorus on the last verse.
basic questions is whether or not we put our trust in God. It's almost impossible for us as human beings to keep from trusting someone. It may be our parents, it may be a good friend, it may be someone who's taught us something, but we tend to trust somebody. And we usually trust them to help us make the important decisions in life. So the only question is what we're going to choose as the object of our trust. Is it going to be things? Is it going to be some woman? What's going to be the object here? We're surrounded by so many things and so many people that compete for our trust. So as we live from day to day, this challenge that we face is to make a wise choice as to the source of our security. Most of us, I think at some time or other, have experienced disappointment because someone we trusted didn't follow through. He didn't give us good information, or he did something that destroyed that trust. He may have said something, as we've been talking about tonight. But one of the most important things we can learn about God is that he's not like that. Back in Proverbs chapter 3, there's a passage we use a lot. And verse 5 simply says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding." So that, along with the verses that follow, are very helpful in who we need to trust. In all your ways, he said, acknowledge him, and he'll make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones. What we learn about God is that he's never going to let us down. He's promised us that our faith in him will never be disappointed. We can not only trust him, but we can put our complete and total faith in him without the slightest fear that he'll ever fail us. So, not only is he the perfect source of security, he's the only source that's available to us. And we're really foolish if we don't avail ourselves of his dependability. To say that we trust God, however, means more than just the words. It means more than having some kind of a simple, warm, fuzzy feeling when we think about God. Putting our confidence in God means that we trust him to be the ruler of our lives. We trust him to be the one in authority. We don't like that authority. We don't like people ruling over us. And it's very difficult for us to willingly submit our hearts. That's where the problem with the tongue comes in. It's where the problem with everything comes in. A willingness to submit to his authority. And not only that, if we are willing to trust him to rule our lives, then our lives will change. And maybe if we're not doing what we should do, it could be that we're not trusting him as completely as we should be. You know, Hebrews 11 is a chapter full of examples of people who actually did things based on the fact that they trusted God. So, as you read through that chapter, you see all of these individuals, and you see how their faith made a difference in the way they obeyed God. James reminds us, as the body apart from the spirit is dead, so also faith apart from works is dead. We've just seen that happen in our studies. So, the question is, do we trust God or not? I mean, really trust God, like we've been talking about here. How we answer that question is a very important thing, the most important thing in our life. So whether we make God the source of our ultimate security, or whether we go somewhere else, is a question we're all going to have to answer. So, to answer that question, we have the God of the Bible that we can read about, we can learn about, we can understand about Jesus as he walks upon this this earth. And we can see the kind of life he lived, the examples that he set, the words, listen to the words that he spoke. And we can see why we need to learn to trust him. I hope you'll think about that. We have a song selected. If there's something we can help you with as far as turning your life over to God, we'll do what we can. Would you come while we stand and hold